I remember the exact smell of the coffee that morning. Bitter, overbrewed, something he left to sit too long while he scrolled without really looking. It was November in the city. Raw, charcoal sky that flattened colors and made faces look like masks. I should have known then that something was wrong. Instead, I folded my hands around the cup and listened to Mark tell me, for the 10th time that week, about some trivial crisis at work while he brushed my hair with distracted fingers and his eyes were elsewhere. His hand found the small scar at my temple, the one from when I was 6 and fell off a bike into the curb. He smiled like it was our secret, like it was something we owned together. I let him smile. I let him fold me into the comfortable belief that I was safe where I was. When I found out about Elena, it was not cinematic. There was no torn blouse, no sudden confession. There was a text. 2 words. Home later? From a number I didn't have saved, sent to him at 2:14 a.m. The timestamp on the message moved through me like a cold, precise blade. I stared at it until the screen blurred. I did not confront him that night. I slept, because part of me wanted to be well rested in case I needed to scream. The rest of me thought sleep could stitch over the torn place workably. In the morning, I watched him over the rim of his coffee cup, watched the way the light came down the apartment's long window and sketched hard lines across his jaw. He stood by the sink, humming, and I watched him as if I were looking at an old photograph of someone I used to love. I told myself I was calm. But my chest pressed against my ribs like a fist. People imagine revenge as a flare. Loud, immediate, spectacular. They think of accidents and ruined reputations delivered in one hot, messy moment. That is not how I wanted it. If he had wanted a storm, he should have thought about the weather first. I wanted something calmer, something relentless. A long, patient erosion of the world he had built around his little lies. I wanted him to taste the slow, intelligent despair of watching your certainty decay into something you cannot control. Step 1 was understanding him. This is the thing about people you think you know. You know their habits, not their mechanisms. You know what they read, what they eat, how they laugh. But you rarely look at their leverage. The bills they can't ignore, the friends who will bail them out, the soft, brittle parts of their conscience that can be nudged and then exploited. Mark was tidy in all the right ways. He liked his accounts reconciled, his shoes lined up neatly in the closet, and his ego massaged with compliments about his competence. He hated mess, uncertainty. He inclined toward explanations that kept him noble. So I collected. I watched him at work via his LinkedIn posts, the proud little professional selfies he uploaded after meetings. I traced his expenses to find patterns, late nights at bars, a recurring lunch order, small transactions that, when mapped, sketched a geography of his unfaithfulness. I found Elena because she liked the same boutique gym he did, because she posted pictures of drinks at a bar that matched the balance on his card. Elena had a laugh that showed teeth and 1,000 followers who admired her minimalist sweaters and intense, practical life. She had no idea I existed. I liked that. I built a profile of his moral currency. What others thought of him mattered. Reputation was the thread I planned to pull. But before I could yank anything, Mark gave me an opening. He left his phone on the kitchen counter that weekend. Face up, his thumb leaving a faint shadow on the glass. He went out to run an errand and left the apartment door unlocked. I told myself curiosity killed, but it also saves. I picked up his phone because catastrophe is sometimes a soft thing. It sits in your palm, and then it fills your lungs. Her name was there in plain text, under favorites, as if she owned a corner of his life. The messages between them were dull in their honesty. Plans to meet, a selfie from a cab, a complaint about his girlfriend being a bit clingy. That word scraped. Clingy is what they call possession when they're ashamed to own it. I read until my eyes burned. I read until my chest did not feel like a fist anymore. When he returned, he found me on the couch as if I had been waiting in pretense. I smiled at him and he kissed my forehead, as if comforting a friend. Not exactly what I wanted, but enough to complicate rage with the memory of our softness. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. That was the first true lie I told him, and I committed to it with an immediacy that felt like cold steel. People whom a partner cheats on often want to destroy both the partner and the other person. But men like Mark are built on a different clay. His cheating was a surface failing. To make him truly lose, I had to attack the pillars. His work, his pride, his certainties. I had to choreograph a defeat that would feel both inevitable and personal. I started small. I invited friends over for dinner and did not tell Mark. I cooked the dish he loved, practiced my laugh so it would come easily, and watched how he held himself in rooms where expectations had shifted. He fidgeted. He corrected jokes before they landed. I let him be the anxious man who feared being unmasked. Next came the more dangerous stage. Information. I learned to read the way he forwarded emails, what he deleted, the times he cleared his browser cache. I photocopied receipts when he left them on the table and matched names against public records. The work felt criminal, but mostly because it was mine. There is always a private cost to learning a fresh capacity for coldness. Then I planted the first seeds of doubt in his friends. I am not proud of every method I used. I can recount them because they mattered, but I will not glorify cruelty for its own sake. I let a warning leak to his colleague, Sarah, through an anonymous email suggesting Mark was distracted at work. It was carefully timed, just before a quarterly review he had been hyped to ace. The seed sprouted. Sarah, who liked things tidy and precise, started to watch him. She sent an offhand message to their boss about a missed deadline. The boss, who liked evidence, followed the trail. A mistake that would previously have been corrected with a minor reprimand became a paper trail. The slow unraveling was intoxicating. Watching a man who thought himself immovable reassess his position is a kind of private cinema. He began to come home late, flustered, and the tone between us shifted. He apologized more, frequently, like someone rehearsing penance. I let him. Every apology softened him as a sculptor softens clay. He was eroding, and where he thought he was being built up by freedom, I was disassembling the scaffolding. I had help. Revenge is a lonely fire until it has fuel. I reconnected with people I used to know. Old friends who remembered Mark's arrogance and who delighted at the chance to see him humbled. I told them what I knew but carefully. I did not ask them to lie. I simply left breadcrumbs. A message here, a photo there. People love to be the carriers of scandal. It made them conspirators by omission, which is often all it takes. There was one person I targeted with more intimacy. Elena. She was the bright point of his infidelity, the object of his brief, fitful worship. She was also a person who curated her image like a brand. I watched her Instagram. Her captions were wry, clinical. She loved the idea of being admired. So I fed her admiration my way. I wrote to her as if I were a fan. Gentle praises, questions about yoga poses, a warmth that sounded like sympathy. From her public persona, she seemed hungry for attention that confirmed her value. I gave it. I became a mirror she liked looking into. The more she liked my messages, the more candid she became. She sent me a photo of Mark asleep on a couch, his hand over his face. She thought she had a confidant. She had me. We became friends, in a way that felt sacrilegious to the version of me, who had once been content with simple honesty. I extracted details gently. What she thought of him when she could meet, how she liked to be courted. She told me the color of his cologne and the name he used when he whispered, like those were trophies. She sent me the map of what he loved. Everyone has a map. It's useful to memorize one before you use it to navigate someone's collapse. On a Friday that would live in my memory like a photograph you can't stop looking at, I executed the part most people expect from revenge, the reveal. But it wasn't a single catastrophic reveal. It was layered like an onion until the center was hollow. I prepared an envelope, white, official-looking, with copies of his most embarrassing messages, printouts of the receipts, and photos. I sent it to his workplace, addressed to the HR manager whose name I had learned on LinkedIn. He received it during a meeting, its contents sliding like an accusation across the table. There were murmurs, a call to HR, and then an awkward official silence. For the first time in my life, I watched him sweat in public and found the sight almost beautiful. At home, in the nights after, we did not speak much. The apartment held its corners like a courtroom. He left for work at hours he thought would be invisible, and I let him go. He began to drink more than he had, and his drinking was clumsy and loud. He left his messages to Elena unsent sometimes, open and raw. He forgot things, keys and dates, as if the world no longer obeyed him. I had not planned for compassion, why would I have? But it came anyway in small, inconvenient shapes. I found him standing in the hallway one night, phone in hand, like someone trying to assemble himself from the wreckage. He looked at me with something that was not a question but a plead. Help me put this together. I did not. I stood like a statue and let the silence do its work. That is perhaps the cruelest thing I did, and I will record it without apology. Absence is a harsh teacher. Then came the more surgical parts. Mark had bills, loans he had co-signed, a small investment portfolio he liked to brag about at parties. Things that made him feel secure because they were beyond the chaos of feelings. I learned who his financial advisor was. I learned the names of the firms he trusted. I called, speaking as a neighbor, an interested third party, a woman with questions about risk. I asked for small pieces of information the way a person asks for directions. Casually, with the right tone, with a misplaced laugh. People give their secrets to people who sound harmless. The advisor told me about a misallocated fund. It was not illegal, but it was something that showed him at fault in the eyes of his company. Another anonymous tip to the right person, and his portfolio was scrutinized. He, who had once walked into negotiation rooms with a steady hand, was suddenly the man who had a fine print to worry about. I told myself that money is an abstraction, a number on paper, and that when it fell away, he would feel it like a loss of identity. I was right. Watching a confident man question his own competence is a rare indulgence. But for every small victory, I had to spend a night that felt like washing the same stain and finding it stubborn as ever. Victory came wrapped in routine. Calling, waiting for responses that never came, drafting emails I never sent because their tone was too obviously triumphant. I learned patience as a craft. I learned to sit with the knowledge of what I knew without needing to broadcast it. That restraint allowed me to sharpen my attacks like a blade honed on a whetstone. On a wet Tuesday in late winter, Mark finally made a mistake that toppled the structure in a single, terrible moment. He had started to make calls at odd hours, his voice tight and confidential. One of those calls, meant for Elena, was overheard in a bakery by a woman who liked drama and had a loud phone. The woman turned his private conversation into a public spectacle, whispering the contents to a friend, who posted a snippet online with the sort of malicious glee the internet specializes in. The clip caught on like a stain. Mark's voice, earnest and confessional, admitting to things that made him look small and unfaithful. The boss who had been watching him took the clip to the board. The board called a meeting. He was suspended pending investigation. Now I could be cruel in the open. He was exposed, not because of a single envelope, but because the world is a fast, hungry place for scandal. He became, overnight, the subject of gossip and pity. His friends wanted to help. His colleagues wanted to distance themselves. People pronounced judgments where legalities were not even involved. He lost clients. He lost the right to be presumed innocent in the court of casual opinion. I should have felt glorious. Instead, I felt empty, like a hand that had finished its work and found the restlessness of a heart inside. The triumph was not the cry I had imagined. It was something quieter, an exhale that left behind an unfamiliar hollowness. It takes a long time to realize that the person you reassemble yourself from will be a different version than the one who set out. When he came to the apartment that night, he looked older by a decade. He said my name like it belonged to someone he was borrowing. "Anna," he said, "let's talk." I let him. I made tea because it felt civil, because one must keep some small customs when a world is collapsing. He sat across from me and talked like a man who had been stripped and was embarrassed by the places he once hoped would be private. His words were small, apologies that smelled of calculation, promises that were like bandages over a broken door. Sometimes I wanted to tear those bandages off and show him how gaping the wound truly was. But I had learned to be surgical. I did not yell. I did not make threats. Instead, I told him things I had learned, specifically and deliberately, like an accountant reading off a balance sheet. I told him what I knew about Elena, what had been shared. I told him about the envelope at work. I told him about the clip in the bakery. I watched the way his face rearranged itself as the narrative closed in on him. He stuttered, occasionally used my name to try to anchor himself, and I let him flail. Then I told him the part he never expected. "You will leave," I said. "You will take only what you can carry. You will not call me. You will not come back." He laughed, sharp and unbelieving. "You can't make me," he said, which is something people always say when they are about to lose. "I won't make you," I answered, "but I will make it so your life is smaller than you imagined." There was no triumph in my voice. There was only a calm, inevitable quality that felt like law. He left 2 days later with a small suitcase and a face that had hardened into a permanent apology. My hands were the same color as his clothing in the photographs he did not bother to take down. Somber, precise, businesslike. In the months that followed, my life resumed its rhythms, subtly altered. I took up running at dawn. The city smelled different in winter light, and breath came in a clean, engaged way that had been absent during the months of strategizing. Friends came back with tentative inquiries, and I answered with a steadiness that sometimes surprised me. Mark found a small apartment across town. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances, and once through his own resigned social media post about starting over. Elena unfollowed me and then stayed silent. The world moved on with the smooth cruelty it always has. People ask if revenge returns you to yourself. If they ask, they want a quick moral. My answer is, it depends on what you mean by yourself. I no longer recognize the woman who believed in simple apologies and tidy reconciliations. She had been replaced by someone who could weigh consequences with the same care she once used to choose paint colors. Revenge carved a new shape out of the old material. I am not kinder, necessarily. I am simply different. Once, I woke in the middle of the night and found myself smiling at the ceiling. I thought of the precise way his coat had hung on the chair that last night, the way he had tried to fold himself into apology like a paper crane. I thought of the envelope and the way paper slides with its own sound, and I felt something like peace settle in my sternum. People like to imagine revenge destroys you. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it makes you a stranger to the person who once loved. But the most insidious transformations are not the ones revenge imposes. They are the ones you choose. I chose to become a person who refused to be erased. For me, revenge was not about ruin, though ruin came, but about the reclamation of narrative. It was a decision to no longer be the woman who waited for explanations. It was a decision to write the story myself, and in doing so, to close a chapter that had thought it could continue indefinitely. Years later, walking past a cafe where Mark once drank bitter coffee and I once stared at a screen waiting for the right life to begin, I saw him silhouette through the glass. Leaner perhaps, surprised by his own smallness. He did not look at me. He was a figure in another's photograph. I kept walking. At home, I keep the envelope. I do not open it. I know what is inside. It is not a trophy. It is a small white thing that proves a transaction took place. The exchange of truth for consequence. When I touch it, I remember the cold morning and the overbrewed coffee and the laugh that belonged to someone else. I am Anna. For a long time, the story of my life had been told in fragments by a man who wore my gentleness like a coat. I rewrote the story until the margins belong to me again. The pages are uneven, and sometimes I wiggle a bit when the wind blows through the broken window of the past. But the narrative is mine, and in the particular geometry of my life, that is victory enough. If you ask me whether I feel triumphant, I will tell you the truth. Sometimes I do, for a brief, bright heartbeat. But most often, what remains is a steadier thing. An illegible, patient calm that comes from knowing you can survive the unraveling and come out on the other side, not unsoiled, but decidedly intact. The envelope sat on the shelf like a quiet promise, and after the first winter passed into a brittle spring, the idea of finishing what I had started began to hum in my bones again. I told myself the first campaign had been tidy, a demonstration that I could pull a thread and unravel a life. But threads are playful things. They lead to other things. The world is stitched from them. I wanted the whole garment to come apart. If my first round had been about exposure, this next phase would be about control. Exposure had made him small. Control would make him dependent on the very people who had humiliated him. I wanted more than his leaving. I wanted him to understand that the consequences of his choices would not be fleeting. I wanted pity to curdle into contempt, then into a desperate, impotent nostalgia. The plan, simple in description and obscene in patience, involved three intersecting fronts. Elena, the colleagues who still clung to him, and the one place he'd never imagined I could touch, his family. People like Mark assume a private life is impermeable. They treat their parents and childhood as a separate archive you don't swipe. I intended to file my fingerprints through it. Elena was first. She had the stubborn arrogance of someone who believed attention would always be paid to them. I continued to be the mirror she liked, only now I reflected a different image. I congratulated her on small successes, praised her photographs, sent her links to articles that hinted at a world outside the glossy surface. I did not push. Instead, I opened doors she could walk through herself. The trick was not to shove but to nudge so the person believed they had chosen the corridor. I gave her an opportunity, a collaboration with an influencer she admired. I introduced her to a fake production assistant via email, supplied a plausible contract, and encouraged her to meet in a public co-working space. The assistant, of course, did not exist, but a man I had hired to play one did. He was unremarkable, polished in a way that begged trust. He offered to help her with logistics, promised to introduce her to contacts. When she agreed to a shoot that required a wardrobe loan, I provided the documents that made it appear real. Small, credible validations, like a string of receipts and a well-timed Instagram like from a petty account I controlled, made the proposition feel true. The night before the shoot, I slid into Elena's DM with a different tone. Soft, almost confessional. I told her something about Mark I had not told anyone. His habit of testing people with small deceptions, the way he gauged loyalty before he revealed himself. I wrote it as if it were a warning from a fellow survivor. She thanked me, and in thanking me, she admitted more. She wrote that she wanted to believe she was different, that what he had with me was an accident of timing. This was the opening I needed. We set the scene to humiliate him gently. Elena, bright and inexperienced in the cruelty of strategy, agreed to a public joining, a staged encounter that would make Mark look like the man he was. Cowardly, dishonest, greedy for admiration. She would be photographed walking away from him as he attempted to explain himself to a crowd that had already decided. The photos would be ambiguous, but the narrative would be inflexible. Elena moving on while Mark begged. But there was more. While Mark flailed in the court of public opinion, I set aside time to visit his mother. I had learned, in the months of observation, that she believed in the boy she raised. Mothers are stubborn with memory. They keep artifacts and excuses. I came to her as a neighbor, someone whose apartment had a leak and who had once shared cookies with her at a block party. I was small and non-threatening, carrying a pie. I listened to her talk about Mark's childhood, the stories of his courage as a child, the scholarships, the good deeds. She spoke in facts that were armor. I let her. Then, slowly, I told her things not as accusations but as careful questions. Had she noticed him change? Had she seen him hide messages? I placed the facts as if they were curious anomalies she could resolve. People who love someone do not like to be told they were deceived. They prefer to be the heroes of their own stories. So I did not accuse. I provided a story that placed her as the rescuer. I told her the truth in a voice that sounded like a granddaughter's concern, that he might be tangled in something that could hurt his reputation and that if she, his mother, were to speak with him, it would matter more than anything I could say. She called him. She scolded. She listened. The effect was surgical. When a mother speaks to a son, the son folds in a way co-workers do not see. Meanwhile at work, the aftershocks I had arranged continued to rattle. Colleagues who had once given him the benefit of the doubt now recoiled. I employed the easiest trick of all time. I sent carefully curated documents to clients that suggested Mark had been careless about contracts. Mistakes that were previously dismissed now aggregated into a careless habit. A few clients withdrew. A project delayed. For a man who measured himself in deadlines and deliverables, this was small death. The climax was not loud. There was no theatrical scene with lights and a confrontation like a play. Instead it was a Tuesday with rain and a boardroom that smelled of coffee gone cold. Elena's staged walking away photos went viral enough to become a subject at the water cooler, and on that same day, Mark's mother, anxious and ashamed, had given him a lecture in front of the family he valued. At work, the board agreed to a suspension pending investigation. He sat at his kitchen table and looked like a boy waiting for a teacher's punishment. He called me that night, voice raw, but he did not beg. He apologized in a sound that felt like someone learning a bad language. "You did this," he said. "I set the facts out where people could see them," I answered. "You taught people how to treat you." There was a tremor of recognition. His understanding that he had engineered his own fall. For a brief moment he reached for contrition, not because he loved me more but because he feared being forgotten. I let him have the moment. I learned long ago that pleading is a kind of desperation that cuts more cleanly than anger. The final move was gentle and irreversible. Mark had once insisted, in a careless certainty, that there were things about his life he could keep. He thought family remained untouchable. I wrote anonymously to the local paper with a tip. No direct slander, only the skeleton of a story about a corporate man whose private dealings had affected local businesses. The paper, hungry for narrative, dug. It found inconsistencies. It asked questions. The investigation uncovered a pattern of favoritism and small conflicts of interest that had been easily hidden in a network of smiles and handshakes. The story hit and washed over his life. Clients recalibrated. Friends texted in awkward tones. His mother called, Then she did not call because she could not reconcile the man she loved with the one the paper described. He lost privileges, a membership, an invitation, an easy place in life that had once been his. He moved again, into smaller rooms, into a life that required explanations. He never regained the confidence that fit him like a coat. And me? I watched it all as if from behind glass. I did not dance. I did not celebrate with champagne. Instead, I arranged my life around new smallnesses. I paid attention to my breathing. I tended to the plants on my windowsill that had survived winter. I allowed friends to cook dinners that tasted of effort rather than cunning. Revenge is often framed as the moment the avenger stands on top of the ruin, chest heaving. My chest did not heave. It had been reshaped, steadier, narrower, acceptable to other people perhaps, but inside, the muscle had changed into a different instrument. There was one evening, months after everything fell, when Mark knocked on my door. He had the look of a person who had rehearsed humility and found the words unsatisfying. He asked, in a voice that had been sapped of theater, if he could come in and sit for a while because he needed to be in a room that felt human. I let him. He sat stiffly on my couch, the way a man sits when he is careful not to occupy anything with his ego. We made tea. We spoke in fragments, about weather, about the absurdity of certain corporate rituals. He spoke of Elena only to say that she had moved away, that she was doing something with photography. He never asked for forgiveness. I don't want you back, he said finally. I don't want us. I had imagined tears and grand confessing and a final, cinematic reconciliation or rupture. Instead, his surrender was an almost tender honesty. I recognized in that moment that I had not wanted him back either. There is a kind of peace that comes from removing the option of return. It is a space you carve so you will not be asked to fit into something that has broken you. Then go, I said. He did. I kept the envelope on the shelf. Sometimes I took it down and smiled at the geometry of paper. Sometimes I feared the person I had become when the hunger was sharp. Once, in a moment of honesty, I told a friend about the way the work had changed me. She asked, quietly, if it had been worth it. Worth it? I repeated, thinking. No. Necessary? Yes. There is a difference. Worth implies a trade that leaves you richer. Necessary implies an action you had to take to keep a shape of yourself that could bear living. Victory, in the quiet light of my small kitchen, did not look like triumph. It looked like a place with fewer lies in it. It looked like the freedom to choose my narrative again, to make mistakes that were mine and not imposed by someone else's duplicity. It looked like a woman who could stand alone in a room and hear the sound of her own breathing without flinching. Years later, I will walk past the cafe again. I may see Mark's silhouette through glass, smaller than the man I remember. He will not look at me. I will not look at him. We will be two figures who once shared a story and then by will and errand, wrote different endings. I am Anna. I avenged the betrayal that cut through my life, and I won, in the narrow, honest way of those who design consequences rather than crash in anger. The price was my own softness, measured by what I could no longer afford to give away. The reward was not the ruin of a man, but the reclamation of a life that would no longer be narrated by someone else's choices. At night, when the city hums like a contained animal, I take the envelope down, run my thumb along its edge, and I close my hand over it. The paper is cold. The past is a weight I choose to carry sometimes, to remember the contours of how I arrived here. I let it sit there, heavy and unquestioned, a final ledger of the truth I turned into consequence. Outside, someone laughs in the street, and for a moment the sound is enough.